Glaciers are the canary in the coal mine for climate change. These rivers of ice, which descend from the mountains, are undergoing rapid retreat and thinning as a result of increased melt in summer and decreased snow accumulation in winter. And the loss of mountain glaciers is a highly visible and irreversible symptom of climate change. In this episode of the Climate Conversation, we talk with Dr. Brian Menounos about the alarm bells that are ringing when we look at glaciers, how we monitor glacier change, the impacts of glacier loss on water resources and Indigenous communities, and the importance of accurate science communication in today's world. This episode was filmed and produced on the traditional territory of the Lheidli-T'enneh, and as always, if you have any questions or comments, you can add them below or send me an email at joseph.shea@unbc.ca.
Yep, my name is Brian Menounos. I'm a professor at the University of Northern British Columbia, also a Hakai affiliate.
Okay.
And I study glaciers, cryosphere, remote sensing in the cryosphere.
Okay. Are you a coffee or tea drinker?
Definitely coffee.
Coffee. Do you prefer cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Dogs. Do you have like a go-to karaoke song?
Copacabana.
Oh, that's a good one actually. I didn't know the answer to this one. I'm going to ask it anyways. Window seat or aisle seat?
Definitely window.
I know. Glacier geographer guy.
At night, not so much.
Not
aisle.
Okay. So it
long
depends
haul, aisle these days.
Yeah.
Getting older.
You need access to the aisle. I got it. Okay, so the phone rings. How do you answer the phone?
This is Brian.
That actually is how you answer the phone. I know that. Can you tell me the last complete album you listened to, end to end, beginning to end?
Probably Black Sabbath.
Yeah? Which one?
I can't remember which one. Heaven and Hell was the last song I listened to. So,
okay. That's a good one.
It's a great song to run to.
Favorite color?
Green, of course.
Green. Oh, he's wearing green today. Would you rather have a time machine or a magic wand?
It's not a rapid fire answer. Probably time machine.
Okay. You could extend on the answer, but this is just to get things going.
Well, if I had a time machine, I could go forward and get a magic wand. So maybe that would be both.
Well, one of our respondents said they would rather have a magic wand because then they could just make a time machine.
Oh, well, okay.
So you can work it either way, I guess.
Yeah.
We'll get into the questions now. Maybe just give me your elevator pitch for what you study.
I study how glaciers respond to climate change, specifically, and most interested in past, present, and future evolution of glaciers under varied climate.
Okay. It's a short elevator ride. That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. And so does this area of research, is this something you've been doing your whole academic career? Is this something you kind of got into during the course of your career? What was the...
Great question. So I did a PhD at University of British Columbia, where I was really interested in fine sediment transfers in mountain environments. And one of the tools I used was lake sediments. So some of these lakes put down layers like tree rings. So you can go back through time, look at evidence of floods and other events in the geologic record. And what became evident was that glaciers are much of the movers and shakers of sediment in the mountains of BC. And so I got more and more interested in how glaciers behaved with respect to climate.
Okay, so your PhD was on the sediment side of things, but then you kind of were like, oh, a lot of this is coming from glaciers, so you moved into the glacier realm.
Exactly. So it was not the focus of my dissertation, but became really focused when I moved here and started a position.
When did you start at UNBC?
2002.
2002. And so you've been kind of researching glaciers for, let's say, 23 years.
More or less, yeah.
More or less.
What
is there something that really stands out for you in that period of time? Is there a finding, or is there a moment that was this is, I don't know, this is the reason I'm doing this thing, or is...
It's a good question. I think really the last couple of years it's been, I hate to sound like an alarmist, but some of the things that are happening to our glaciers right now, the rate of mass loss, how much water is being lost from these glaciers is really accelerating.
Yeah.
It's not just from the temperature itself and a warming climate, but also some of these other factors. And that really, for me, has been sort of like a aha moment that maybe some of our projections on how quickly they're going to disappear are sort of out of date.
A little conservative, maybe.
Yeah, and we
Okay.
might need to look at better models going forward.
So maybe run us through like how do you monitor glacier change?
Yeah, so there's a variety of ways that people can understand glaciers. Glaciers in many ways behave like a bank account. So you can put money in, or in the case of a glacier, you're putting in mass, primarily in our part of the world, through winter snowfall. And those glaciers, like a bank account, may undergo a net withdrawal in the summertime because it's warm temperatures driving surface melt. And so when you think about how to measure a glacier and how its health is doing, you kind of sum up those two components: how much mass is being added to those glaciers and how much is being lost. People have been doing this for over a century, not in our part of the world, but in Europe. People have been sticking poles in glaciers. We even have several glaciers here where people will go out and measure the season by season and year by year change in how much they're gaining and losing mass. But you can only do that for a handful of glaciers.
Yeah.
And so there's other ways that we can do that using spaceborne observations, so lasers from space. We can also use aircraft that have instrumentation to allow us to see elevation change over these glaciers through time.
Okay.
So it's really a variety of different techniques. You really want to take both of those approaches, remote sensing and in situ or ground-based observations, have advantages and disadvantages. And the best way is to sort of look at those deficits and kind of combine the sources to come up with the best estimates.
Okay. And so you said you didn't want to be alarmist or come off as alarmist, but the alarm bells are ringing for you.
Oh, they're like
So-
there's like multiple gongs going off.
We're in the gong show era
Yeah.
now. Okay, what does that mean? Like going forward, where do you see, or what do you see the impacts as being as this climate change proceeds and glaciers are responding in an alarming way?
Well, one of the service functions of our glaciers, when we think of glaciers in British Columbia and Alberta, we can sort of, Alberta is pretty much what I'm going to say next, but BC glaciers is a little bit more complicated. Let me step back for a minute and say, let's think about glaciers on the planet. And if glaciologists are interested in studying these glaciers, we often will think about geographic regions. So British Columbia is a great example. We have glaciers that straddle the Alaska-BC border. We also have glaciers that are wholly within the province, and those that straddle the Alberta-BC border. When we talk about glaciers contributing to sea level rise, those really are the so-called Alaska glaciers. These are the ones that straddle that Alaskan border.
Yeah.
Even though they're Canadian glaciers, we allow the Alaskans to sort of temporarily call them Alaskan glaciers.
Careful, this might get out. So
That's okay. That's okay. We're going to start tariffing the Alaskans for our ice. So, but when we think about glaciers within Alberta and the pretty much south of Prince George, when those blink away, it's really it's a loss of buffering capacity for many of our headwater streams. So those glaciers provide cool, plentiful water when seasonal snow is at a minimum. And so that's kind of when the glacier melt kicks in.
yeah,
Right now, it seems like, wow, we've got tons of extra money in the bank because the glaciers are really undergoing lots of melt right now. But we're kind of robbing from that long-term bank, and what we're going to find in a couple of decades is that we've lost that buffering capacity.
yeah. So it's like a glacier bankruptcy, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. It's even worse. It's like you're borrowing on credit.
Oh, so then you're in debt, and you're
You're
in
in
the hole
debt.
too.
You're in debt, yeah.
And the backdrop of this is, warming climates as well, but reduced like reliability of water in some of these glacier-fed streams.
It's probably more that buffering capacity of
Yeah.
both the quantity but also the temperature. So
Okay.
that that water provides a good thermal regulation for many aquatic systems that rely on cool, plentiful water. And so if you don't have that cool, plentiful water, you're setting up a susceptibility for many of these systems. When I say aquatic ecosystems, think fish.
Yeah.
Bull trout, for example, are really quite sensitive to temperature variations. Some type of salmon are. And so when you lose that buffering capacity, you're really setting up a vulnerable situation going forward.
Yeah. I mean, so none of these are good news stories, right? So when you do your science on a day-to-day basis, does that start to weigh on you? Is that something you think about all the time, or is it more you can sort of shut it off and like?
I think of it, but I'm really fascinated by the science that we do.
Yeah.
It's puzzle solving on in large scale. So it's really interesting when you're in the trenches doing the work. You're working with students. You're working with grad students, postdocs, collaborators. I almost delay my my anxiety until I get home, and then sadly, my kids, when they were much younger, I would yell at them to get out of the shower. Keep a 10-minute shower, and so I would sort of almost project my anxiety.
So you bottle up your climate anxiety,
which wasn't very good. No.
Okay, well, that might be another conversation to have about that. But let's maybe switch gears a bit and think about so you also teach here at the university. You teach courses on like glacial geology. You've taught lots of different courses through the years. How has your teaching on climate change changed?
Well, in the last couple of years, I've done a lot less teaching.
Yeah.
The last 2 years, I've been under a secondment working with the federal government, working on glaciers and glacier change. But certainly, I remember when I first started here at the university, I think in 2005, I started in 2002. 2005, I believe I did a graduate module. And even at that time, one of the tasks I had the students prepare for was a debate about climate change and whether it was caused by humans themselves. And so, in fact, the students who had to take the climate denial point of view actually did a far better job because they had to research both sides of the story.
Topics. Yeah, okay.
For me, that was really kind of the last time we really actually had any sort of real discussion about what the evidence was. It's crystal clear that there's overwhelming evidence, and now it's a matter of what do we do about it? And we still debate those.
Okay, but that's a great segue. So let's get into the what do we do about it kind of portion here. So, and I know we ask these questions of everyone because I think people have opinions about this no matter what discipline they're coming from. So I know if you're coming from the sort of the scientific perspective where you're documenting the changes and proposing hypotheses and things, but you probably still have some pretty strong opinions on what to do about it. Do you see that there's sort of like low-hanging fruit that we could do locally or regionally in terms of whether it's adaptation or mitigation options?
I think sadly for many of our glaciers, we globally have sealed their fate. So it's not a question of, talking around the margins about how much is going to be lost. Many of these medium to small scale glaciers are going to be gone.
Yeah.
So it's at that point we have to start thinking about what do we do?
Yeah.
So for example, I have a student right now who's quite interested in glacial lakes. And so she's going to be, as part of her PhD, she's going to be thinking about where will the new lakes form? What sort of strategies could we use to adapt and think about perhaps collecting a whole series of over-deepened basins, providing that ability to give that information to First Nation communities, to give it to government to say, we know the glaciers are going to be gone, but here's the sites of potential reservoir storage, not for hydropower per se, but for releasing that water late in the summer when, in a way to mimic a glacier.
Yeah.
It's not a perfect analog because that water will warm up, The Swiss, for example, have thought about this and have implemented it to some degree, I believe, in small scale. But these are the sorts of things you have to start thinking about doing now,
Yeah.
not in 20 or 30 years.
So one of the parts of the course, I think they said that that's where we are today as a result of mitigation efforts of the past, right? So just give me a quick reflection on that. How does that land with you?
Can you repeat the question?
Where we are today in terms of like atmospheric carbon dioxide is a result of mitigation options of the past. Do you see that were there errors or mistakes that were made in the past in terms of trying to actually address this problem?
To my knowledge and my recollection, no. I mean, what we've made mistakes back in the time in the early 80s. There's a great, I think it's the early 80s or maybe it's the mid or late 80s. Al Gore is, I think it was...
The father of the internet.
Yeah, but I think it was it was Carl Sagan. So Carl Sagan was called before to testify in front of the U.S. Congress,
Yeah.
and he gave a pretty much unfettered, really basic view of what greenhouse gas emissions were doing, what the greenhouse effect was, and what the U.S. had to do about it.
Yeah.
Sadly, nothing happened. Al Gore was in the audience. You could see him staring with laser eyes, realizing, yeah, this is really important. We didn't do anything. What is remarkable is that a lot of the climate projections from that time pretty much projected where we are right now.
Yeah.
So if you look at the hypothesis of global warming and the greenhouse effect, it is elegant in how, as part of a science, you propose a hypothesis, you make observations, and you test it. But you make the predictions before, or the physics. You look at the physics and then you test it with observations, and that's exactly what's been happening.
Yeah, the physics don't really lie, do they?
Not to my knowledge, no.
But this brings up, I think, a point. I haven't really talked about this with other interviewees, but there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I feel it's getting worse. Like there was sort of used to be this roster of standard climate deniers out there, but now it feels like it's in a lot of different places too. A lot of people, like social media.
Thank you, social
influencers.
media.
Thank you, social media. So this is a big question, but are there ways to combat that misinformation or disinformation?
I think in some ways there are. I used to several decades ago, I was fearful, didn't take media interviews. I've done over 60 this year alone.
Yeah.
I talk a lot to the media, and I do this mostly because it's absolutely essential that the public understands and hears from scientists about what's going on, and it's not a filtered version based on sort of a retelling of stories in social media.
Yeah.
Like anything,
Yeah.
often when it's third or fourth hand, it becomes sometimes lost in translation, or perhaps for other reasons, it's lost on purpose.
Yeah. No, and I actually do think that that's a really important role that academics can play too, is trying to put the word out there. And I feel in some ways though it's almost like a losing game. Like in the sense that social media is so big and so pervasive that these voices of reason and scientific objectivity kind of get drowned out.
They do, and I think that's where scientists play an important role, in that they speak to the media.
Yeah.
They're selective in what they talk about. Try to stay in your lane,
Yeah.
because if you're too far outside your lane, you're going to get criticized,
Yeah.
or you may actually not, be that expert to talk about those things. But also talking at the community levels,
Yeah.
talking to high school students, talking to elementary school kids. That's really important, not just for information, but also so that a lot of young people have an idea that you can explore things like geography, you can explore things like glaciology, and it's a great career to have as well.
What stands out for you? Are there any highlights from sort of maybe field work you've done or projects you've worked on? Like, are there kind of like, yeah, that was awesome.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that happened earlier this week, which was kind of cool.
Earlier this week.
Earlier
Okay, we got a
this
fresh
week.
one.
So last month I gave a presentation to the Union of BC Indian Chiefs annual General Assembly. That was an honor to be there. And so I talked a little bit about freshwater and glacier change. And earlier this week, the UBCIC has declared that 2025 to be the year of glacier preservation. So they are supporting the United Nations initiative, but also the start of the cryospheric decade of awareness and monitoring. So to have such a powerful organization call out that glaciers matter for Indigenous people was quite an honor. It's also a great opportunity to perhaps work with them going forward.
That's fantastic. I'll give you a little round of applause for that one. That's great. No, that is actually, that kind of shows that the role of, speaking out on these and being present and being available to interview and talk about these things is really important to make those sorts of changes happen.
Well, and certainly for Indigenous people, if you think about, like, they have lived in these landscapes for time immemorial, thousands and thousands of years, and to have them watch an important freshwater resource blink away and disappear, sadly, those communities are going to feel the greatest effect.
Yeah.
And the problem was not necessarily theirs. It was really a collective and larger component of Westerners coming in and causing part of that problem.
Yeah, and we've spoken with a few other speakers as well about this idea of justice and the not the vulnerability is not the word I want, but it's more like that the front lines, the people are going to feel the impact the most, are going to be these smaller communities that have relied on the resource or the specific function of that resource for, as you say, thousands and thousands of years. So, are there ways that you see adaptation sort of being an option in some of these communities, or is there something else to sort of think about?
I think so. I think in some ways, because fish are such an important livelihood and way of life for Indigenous people, thinking about, okay, when these glaciers go, where might there be high elevation lakes? Those are sort of the things that could be used as perhaps adaptation.
Yeah.
But that's really going to require not just Indigenous people, but also perhaps the standard consulting firms working with governments to really come up with better ways to prepare for those events going forward. Also, I mean, we're finding in some cases some of these geohazards that are happening. It's still not, there seems to be an association between retreating glaciers and instability of steep slopes. It's not an open and shut case. There's a lot of complexity in what's happening there. But what we are finding is that some of our seasonal snow lines on these glaciers, so that elevation which demarcates or delimits the difference between the lower ice and the areas where snow retained or used to be retained year by year and replenish those glaciers, those snow lines are going so high that we're having melt happening at such high elevations
all the way up,
that we're getting marginal lakes that form and occasionally fail, as one has been repeatedly failing at Place Glacier, a small glacier outside of Pemberton. But this is posing a substantial hazard for downstream communities.
Yeah. I'm trying to think where this should go, but maybe I'm gonna touch on I'm gonna do this called the hot off the presses kind of thing. Can you talk about maybe a recent paper publication that you've put out and like what some of the big research questions that you're trying to answer right now are?
Sure. So we had a paper come out in June, I think, that kind of uses data from one of our important partners, the Hakai Institute. So we were talking about remote sensing of glaciers. So one technique is to use an aircraft, and I'm the first to acknowledge that aircraft is not green, so it's belching out CO2.
Oh, the hypocrisy, Brian.
so,
The hypocrisy.
I mean, these are the sorts of things that will
Yeah.
hopefully eventually transition to
Yeah.
hydrogen, let's say. Well, anyway, we've been collecting data for about 1,000 glaciers twice a year in Western Canada, and that study really asked the question based on an earlier study that came out in 2021 that showed that the rate of acceleration, how fast these glaciers were melting, was speeding up. So between the first 2 decades of the 21st century, we noticed that the speed of glacier change had more or less doubled.
Yeah.
What we found in this more recent paper is that it doubled again. And so over about the last 4 years, our glaciers in Western Canada lost about 12% of their volume. So
In 4 years.
in 4 years. And
That's the little
so,
whistle.
yeah, so that's, we think it's caused by both really warm temperatures. It also is a bit drier, but also what we're finding is that these surfaces are becoming darker. And that's important because a darker surface can absorb more energy coming in from the sun.
Yeah.
So anyone who goes outside on a warm or a cold winter day is wearing a dark fabric is going to feel that fabric feels a bit warmer. And so glaciers behave in a similar sort of way. So if you darken those surfaces, in addition to the warmer temperatures, you're also getting more energy from sunlight. We think that's happening because snow lines are rising, exposing ice, which is darker for longer. But we also think that wildfire is playing an important role in terms of depositing impurities onto these snow and ice surfaces.
So these systems, the cryospheric system and now the biosphere system, everything is kind of like, it's affected by climate change, and now there's and also like interacting effects.
It's very strong interaction,
Yeah.
and the projections for both temperature and wildfire activity. Wildfire, as you know, Joe, is partly influenced by soil moisture and vegetation, how moist that vegetation is. So if you get a situation where you have snowpacks thinning, melting earlier, you're drying out the vegetation and the soil, you're just setting up conditions for more severe wildfire years.
Yeah. More carbon deposition. On
More
your
carbon
glaciers,
deposition.
More melting of the glaciers. Okay, so that's a fun feedback cycle to get into. Maybe just kind of wrap things up. So we're proposing this course, this content, these interviews we're doing is going to be sort of condensed to support a climate change course that's going to be offered here at the university. Are there some key messages you would want students taking the course to walk away with?
Well, one, maybe just thinking about what your earlier comments you just made is that this is a complex system. So when we think about how these systems will respond to climate change, there are important feedbacks that we haven't actually considered. And that's interesting scientifically, but it's also, unfortunately, sometimes alarming. But rather than stick our heads in the sand and forget and say everything's on fire, that's not a good approach. Decision makers need accurate data, they need up-to-date data to make informed decisions. It's really, it's up to decision makers, and when I say decision makers, politicians at all levels of government and internationally, to make those decisions. It is hard and difficult to balance these multiple effects: climate change, terrafor with where you thought we were never going to have one. So it's difficult. I do not envy their role, but I think it is also critical that we understand the importance of monitoring, that we understand that science has to proceed, even if science doesn't have the best story or it's a depressing story. If you don't tell that story, then you're really kind of putting yourself in a more vulnerable position than you otherwise would be.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's actually, I think, really useful advice or information for the students to take away from. Last question. What was your favorite field site? You've been to a lot of different mountains. Do you have a favorite?
Favorite field site or favorite glacier?
Wow, I kind of know your favorite glacier.
Oh, okay.
What's your favorite field site? You can do both. I'll give you both.
Okay, one of my favorite field sites was in Patagonia, where I got to go to the Stopani Glacier, ride a horse. It was basically a 2-day horseback trip to get to this glacier in southernmost Patagonia.
Had you ridden horses before this?
I had, but
Oh,
they
okay.
still scare me.
They're big animals.
Yeah, they scare me more than helicopters. But both you have to actually touch and as you walk around them.
Yeah.
So stay out of the kill zone.
Yeah. Okay. And favorite glacier? You might as well.
Clean, of course.
Yeah.
This is the drains. It's technically called the Clean Silver Throne, and that it drains from the Heltzig ice field, and it's on the order of about 1,200 square kilometers. So that ice field alone, in 2023, I think generated about 4 gigatons of water loss.
Whoa.
So that was about 1/3 of all of Western North American ice.
From this one ice mass.
Yeah, it's a very large and very important glacier and ice field complex to monitor. Just to give you an idea too, that the lower part of the glacier from about 1948 to present has thinned on the order of close to 500 meters.
500 meters of lowering
thinning.
of the surface of the
Thinning.
ice.
Yes.
Wow. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of alarming.
And alarming.
On that note, Brian, thanks so much for coming in. Thanks for your time and for answering all these questions.
You're very welcome.
Okay.
Thanks.